Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg, back for another episode with David M. Booher, his third time on this podcast, but this time around to talk about the one, the only Ghostbusters. David is one of the writers on Ghostbusters Back in Town over at Dark Horse Comics. It is a 4-issue miniseries that is going to happen in between Ghostbusters Afterlife and the upcoming Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. A wonderful story about using characters that are in the first of these two movies, that the newer Ghostbusters movie, I should say first, but actually the third in this line of Ghostbusters movies, Ghostbusters Afterlife. And so we talked that. We talked a little bit of Canto, a little bit of Killer Queens, a little bit of everything in between. David is the writer on this Ghostbusters Back in Town, which is available March 27th. So make sure you tell your LCS that you want it and pick up all of the issues. And then go see Frozen Empire on March 22nd at theaters everywhere. But before you do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, as well as rate, review, subscribe, all those things over on Apple, Spotify, and all your major podcasting platforms. You can see the video portion on capesandtights.com as well as our YouTube channel. This is David Booher talking in Ghostbusters Back in Town from Dark Horse Comics right here on Capes and Tights Podcast. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome back, David, to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited to be back here talking about fun new comics.
I know, right? It's just fun. It's funny because you've come on to talk your comics before, and this is still your comic, but like it's a someone else's property that you're doing. You're talking Ghostbusters here. It was kind of funny because it's so official with these things too. I gotta get rid of these questions and things we talk about by the higher ups to make sure you don't say anything you're not supposed to say, right?
Yep, and yet I still end up saying just whatever I want. The consequences come or they don't come. I don't know. So far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we just sort of wing it and see what happens, right?
Yes, exactly. But before we jump right into Ghostbusters, what have you been up to? Have you been doing conventions? Other stuff? I mean, obviously been working on Dungeons and Dragons. What else have you been doing?
So Dungeons and Dragons has been coming out the last couple of months. The con circuit has not really started in earnest yet. I think we're looking at maybe WonderCon. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but WonderCon is sort of the big, I think, first show that really kicks off the con season in March. I think it's the end of
March,
last weekend in March, this year. So I'll be going to that, but not tabling or anything. It's been a lot of head down writing work as we start this new year. So Ghostbusters, when we talk about it, it's going to be kicking off at the end of March, right around the same time as WonderCon.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be really the big start of my getting out of the cave, as you can see, to actually rejoin the human race after head down.
After a chosen time away from human race, whereas before, a couple of years ago, it was a forced time away from human race. Now we're actually just choosing to take time away from the human race and do things and work on stuff. But yeah, so you're doing Ghostbusters. It's pretty cool. When I saw, I saw that they were doing another comic book and things like that, and then it was connected to the movies and that you were working on it. I was like, okay, first of all, home run right here. But then obviously your other creative team on it too is dynamite as well. So it's not just you, nailing it here. So Ghostbusters is back in town, comes at the end of March, and is connecting the two films. Am I right about that? Is that the idea?
Yes, so it's a loosely connected. We were given a lot of freedom to sort of do what we wanted to. The setup is basically after Ghostbusters Afterlife, which takes place in Oklahoma. The Spangler family, which is Egon's daughter and grandchildren, and Gary Gruberson. If you haven't watched Ghostbusters Afterlife, please, anybody who's listening, please go watch it. It's such a fun
go
movie.
Watch it and come back. Yeah,
it's just a fantastic tribute to everything that came before, while also pushing in a brand new direction. So our direction on the comic was, there was this new movie that was coming that for a long time was not referred. We didn't have the title. So it's now Frozen Empire is coming, and in Frozen Empire, the Spangler family has moved to Manhattan into the firehouse. So they've become sort of this new Ghostbusters team, picking up the equipment and the mantle from the original Ghostbusters team that we know from the 80s, right? So the comic takes place between it takes, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but basically we're kicking off this new life for the Spangler family in Manhattan as they're sort of coming and moving into the firehouse for the very first time.
It's awesome. I got a chance to look at it. Caitlin over at Dark Horse sent me the first issue to look at. It's wonderful. The artwork's amazing in it. I think the story's great. And are you working with Greg Pak on this? What's the connection there on that?
So Greg sort of did an outline for the story,
Okay.
and I kind of took up the mantle to write the scripts and work with Jason Reitman and Gil
Mhm.
Keenan, who's directing the new Frozen Empire, the Ghost Core team, the sort of the team that oversees the Ghostbusters franchise. They're very involved in all of these stories, so I got the chance to really work closely with them in creating a comic book that is something that we all just love and can't wait to get out there.
Is have you been a lifelong like Ghostbusters fan? I mean, is David like a fan of Ghostbusters from a young child to this? Is this like a dream come true?
Yeah, the reality is that Greg and I, cage fought for this. No, I'm just kidding. Greg's wonderful. No. My, so I've worked with Dark Horse for a long time on
Yeah.
Killer Queens, and now Canto's there with with them. Um, and Killer Queens sort of was what got me on the radar with this editorial team and Sony and Ghost Corps and all the folks behind the Ghostbusters sort of universe. So now I've just completely lost my train of thought. What was your question?
If you've been a
This is a
Ghostbusters
thin
fan,
mountain ahead.
how did you get behind this as your Ghostbusters fan?
Oh,
How did
oh,
you get into
oh,
this? Yeah.
yeah. So sometimes these opportunities come up, and it's not something that you're not in the fandom, so you're like, do I want to do? Am I going to do this justice if I'm not like a huge fan of this? You kind of find your way in. For Ghostbusters, when they came to me, I was like, look, I have watched Ghostbusters 2, which was my entry because it came out in '89 and I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So I came to the original Ghostbusters sort of after it had come out because I think it's '84.
Mhm.
But Ghostbusters 2 with Vigo the Carpathian and the pink slime under the city and the sewers, that was like my thing. And I watched it so many times when it came on cable as a kid. I watched the Ghostbusters cartoon it was after school Saturday morning. I loved the cartoon. I ate the cereal. We bought the Ghostbusters cereal from the 80s. So I loved that. So when they said Ghostbusters, I was like, of course, I have such a nostalgic love for this whole franchise. And then I had watched Afterlife before they had even, talked to me about it. And I really loved what they were doing. So I was like, yes,
Mm.
of course I want to come into this new aspect of the new universe, sort of this forward-looking new direction, and be a part of it. And being a part of this larger, um, I keep saying universe. It's like family. Ghostbusters is
Yeah.
all about family, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's your found family or your family by blood. And to come into this Ghostbusters family has been just it's like a dream come true moment.
That's all. I mean, but with the dream come true, must come also, some sort of anxiety or stress to the idea that, I mean, Ghostbusters has a family or following. I wouldn't say to the extent of maybe Star Trek or Star Wars or things like that. I mean, they have a big following and people love the movies, and the comics and stuff, but like in the animated show, but to do something wrong. Meaning that, like, like I've talked to people who like write Star Wars or Star Trek, and it's like sometimes they have this anxiety or stress that like there's a lot of people who could judge what you're doing and how you go about things. This is not, you're ruining Ghostbusters by doing a certain thing. Does that go into your mind at all, or do you just tell the stories that you need to tell and that make the most sense in your mind?
I mean, I don't think about I think about the fan reaction, but in the way that sort of how I would react as a
Mm,
fan. There's always going to be those fans that are sort of unhappy, and then you get the really sort of unhinged ones who are like, "We don't want any of this to reflect what's actually going on in our world. We want 1984 back, please. Thank
mm,
you."
yes.
Um, yeah, we're not. If those fans get pissed off, I don't care. Um, But I think about it, and as a fan, if I'm happy, if I'm satisfied, because I'm a fan of the franchise, so I know what makes me happy. And if folks aren't happy, then they're we aren't. It isn't a zero sum game in Star Trek, Star Wars, Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
any of that. By writing a comic book that you don't love is not taking a piece away from the 1984 movie. We're not
No.
removing Stay Puft from the universe forever and ever, so you can never experience that again. It is not. It is not a plus one minus one sort of
Hmm.
scenario. So you get back to zero. Um, I think folks are going to like what we do, and we also have the luxury. These are fairly new characters, right?
Mm.
This family is sort of new characters, and we introduce the old characters and sort of give that fun service to those characters everybody loves. But ultimately, this is kind of us going in a new direction with it, so we kind of have a lot of freedom to just sort
Mm.
of play around with who these characters are and how they fight ghosts,
Mm.
because it's a different dynamic, for blue collar guys
Yes.
versus a family, and it's a
Yeah.
family dynamic now with teenagers.
And I can see where you're coming from. That I guess I was thinking as I asked that question and you were talking was that like Star Wars people who write Star Wars comics are writing comics that include Luke Skywalker in it as a main character, and they're telling new stories with Luke. So if they screw that up to someone else's Luke, you're touching their initial love. Whereas this it's the next generation of stories too. So it's not like you're going through and adding on to the original, Ghostbusters. You're
Right.
adding on to the Ghostbusters afterlife that happened only a few years ago. That has only been in the
Yeah.
minds of people for a few years now, not the '84 version of it. But yeah.
Right. And Ghostbusters I think is different in kind from this other franchises, because we haven't been sort of saturated with Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
So I think fans for the most part are happy to have more Ghostbusters. Some might be better than others. You might
Mm.
like some more than you
Yeah.
like others, but the fact that we're getting more, my gut is that the fandom is excited to have it be expanding rather than being protective about what, exists out there.
Out there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can see that. I definitely think that and I use the Afterlife movie talking to so many people about if another franchise is going to reboot or reset or do something with their movie franchise, that this is the basis they should use is the Afterlife movie, because it's just so well done. Like if I said, if any other movie ever wanted to do a reboot but didn't want to touch the original, didn't want to say the original didn't exist, that we're rebooting the whole thing, the
Right.
Afterlife blueprint is like something that people should use because it's just so well done because it existed, but we're gonna move on and tell our own ghost stories. We're gonna do it now. This is all there, but we're just gonna do our new stuff. And I think that's such a perfect way of doing it. I was thinking to myself that like they could do that. They talked about the new Jurassic Park. They could do it with that. They could do if they ever wanted to touch Back to the Future. Back to the Future. That's you could use like Marty's kids or Doc's
Well,
kid.
right. So
You could
yeah,
you could go forward with that. Yeah.
you embrace there's 35 years that passed between the original Ghostbusters and Afterlife, right? So it was
Yes.
84 to 2019, so 35 years. This is going to be 40 years this year. um and embracing that time lapse with introducing the new family, to me, was such a clever and sort of, it's so clever because it's really obvious to me that you just embrace this new generation. If you want to get a new generation of fans, you just give them characters that they can see themselves as when their grandfather was a Ghostbuster in
Mm-hmm.
'84. Because honestly, the teenagers now, their grandparents are getting to be us, which is
Mm-hmm.
really, these 80s kids are having grandkids who are teenagers. So it's terrible, ghosts and busting ghosts is terrifying, but nothing is quite as terrifying as realizing that you're old enough to be a grandparent.
luckily, luckily, I'm a few years away from that. I was born in '86, so I'm only 2 years past when this movie came out. And then
Oh,
my second child is about to be here. So see, I have a 3-year-old and I have one that's due in March. So there's like I got a while before I'm gonna be a grandparent.
yeah. Well, I guess, yes, that's true. So the kids in the '80s are not quite
Well,
grandparents
some people can
yet,
like,
but
but they're getting. I mean, think about it. If I had friends of mine who have 18, 19-year-olds. It's not like they had a kid at 18 or 19 years old when they were fresh out of high school. And that means that if they got married, like my parents got married at 18 or 19 years old and had a kid, they're not that far off from being a grandparent. So you're not wrong on that.
Mm-mm.
It's just I'm thinking to myself, I started a little late with the kids thing. So like I have a 3-year-old, so I'm not worried about that for a number of years. But in the end, in the end, what's the think of Dave? You think the possibility I could show them Afterlife before I even show them Ghostbusters? My kids. Do you know what I mean? Like it's possibility that I end up putting that movie on because it's so much more not kid friendly, but like there's people they can see on the screen that
There's
would,
ways to
yeah.
for them to identify with what's going on in Afterlife, whereas the in the original Ghostbusters, there just wasn't the kid entry point. It was a fun sort of family movie, but it was all starring. Like you can't do that now with movies where
Yeah.
I guess you can, but it's very hard to, I look from my perspective as a writer and pitching ideas and things, and it's very hard to get a movie going for families, all
Yeah.
ages, where you don't have at least some of those characters that kids can identify with. So I think you're right. I think showing Afterlife to kids, getting them hooked in and saying, well, all these things they talked about, and Egon, Phoebe's and Trevor's
Yeah.
grandfather, this is what they did
Yeah.
in the 80s, and then show them the movie. Of course, they'll snicker because it's all dated and nobody's
Yes.
using cell phones.
Part of the charm to the whole movie though is that in the aspect of like having these like out like these contraptions that are doing things that nowadays would all be like if it was designed and created now it would look so different and all that. But I mean Star Wars lived off that, thrived off that with the idea that the first 3 movies in the the story of Star Wars were all these special effects, whereas the 70s, 80s, those movies obviously had different special effects and they actually are
Right.
prequel. So like in a sense, I could be like, see this and then watch the prequel because it's older and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there's that fan service to see the older characters in there, but in the same sense, having characters that are basically similar characters, if not to Stranger Things, where kids are like jumping and thriving over Stranger Things right now. So it's like I don't know.
Right.
It meets so many different things and entry points for people that Ghostbusters now is like is talked about all the time again, and that's what's cool about it. And that adding in the comic book aspect of it even makes me even happier. But you've dealt with a lot of. I mean, you've written young adult stuff. You obviously written stuff like Canto and stuff like that. So you have this ability to, talk to younger kids or younger people, as well as you've written some more of adult things. So you have that ability to do both. Are you balancing that with this new, back in town, like we just talked about with the movie, having a little bit of both, like a little bit of
Yeah.
attention to younger people and to the people who have been the 84 fans?
Yeah. So a couple of, I've been talking to some other folks and for publicity, and a couple people have mentioned balancing humor and horror.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what it is. I never really described it that way, but that's exactly what Ghostbusters is. It's this beautiful mashup of humor and horror. So it's scary, but it's also super funny. So I can't tell you the joy that I took in writing the comic book and balancing these two things, putting in these scary monsters that are, and ghosts and ghost creatures, and just like blanketing Manhattan with creepy crawlies, and then being able to write Gary's one-liners and Phoebe's dad jokes, and just like Callie just rolling her eyes at Trevor, and Trevor just stumbling through, trying to be as cool as he can be and not succeeding very much. It's just that's Ghostbusters to me,
Mhm.
as they can face these giant terrors, the things that go bump in the night, and you always know somebody's going to throw in there that a line that's just going to cut that tension and make you giggle before they take out the bad guy.
Yeah, and then having someone, your creative team behind it, you got, is it Delaquante? Blue?
Yeah, Delaquanti.
Yeah.
I have not
Blue.
heard Blue's name spoken out loud. It's all been via email. So
And I try
funny.
to look these things up ahead of time too, and I always like, oh yeah, I'll look that up to see because it's probably some sort of previous interview or pronunciation online. And I did and I didn't, and I was like, oh crud! Now I'm gonna have to say this. But Blue's artwork is
We'll say
so
blue.
great. Yes, and then obviously colors by Mildred Lewis and letters by Jimmy Betancourt. But the book itself is so cool because it just reminds me of the like an animated show. Like that style of artwork in it is so great and so approachable, because I think sometimes I read a lot of horror comic books and they're gruesome and sometimes they're very grungy, if the words they use it, very chaotic. And this is just so clean and crisp that it's like it doesn't take away from the story or the opposite. It's just so easy to just comprehend and get through. I loved the entire team on this one.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think it's interesting. The style is so we sort of embrace the comic as it's just like the cartoon from the 80s, and then the cartoon from there was a 90s, the Extreme Ghostbusters had a different
Mhm.
style. You know, there's all these different iterations of Ghostbusters in this universe. They all have their own sort of identity. And it's fun to me that we have a comic that doesn't look like Afterlife, doesn't look like the cartoon that came before, doesn't look like Frozen Empire. You know what I mean? It it doesn't look like the video game. It looks sort of it is its own iteration of Ghostbusters. So yeah, I'm really excited to have that out there and add to this sprawling, wonderful haunted universe.
Mhm. And now you're attached to it. Now you got, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, David Booher. They're all in the same sentence there, right?
Same breath, same
same,
breath.
same, same.
I
It's
love
like
it.
can't say one without the other now. It's the way it works.
I will
Uh,
say there is some fun to this because like release day, we're doing a big signing event, like a big release day event at We Can Be Heroes, which is a shop that's close to me in Southern California. And they're going to have the LA area Ghostbusters, the group. They're going to have an Ecto One. I don't know if I'm supposed to be sharing all that, but I'm totally putting it out there for promotion purposes. Um, but it's like that kind of you don't. It's being a part of something where those kinds of things can are also part of it. I've never had that experience. I wrote Firefly, and nobody flew Serenity in to
so
a signing. I wrote D&D. I did get a group of cosplayers that cosplay the D&D cartoon characters, which was kind of cool, but I've never had an event like this where it's going to be built around such a beloved franchise and such
yeah.
beloved characters that I get to be a part of that.
That piggybacks on one of the questions I had written down, which was like writing your own creation, like Canto or Specs or those things, versus writing something like Ghostbusters, where there is rules, people you have to check in with, things you have to do. Obviously, you don't want to tell something in back in town that they might touch in Frozen Empire or potentially a third movie or things like that. So like there are things that you might have written down and sent to them and then like, don't touch that yet because we might actually get to that, or that's in the movie or so on and so forth. What's it like, the difference between, obviously you just mentioned those positive things like having the
Sure.
Ghostbusters area come to you and get to see all the guys with that, Ecto One and all that stuff. But like, what's the writing process like, having to deal with some? I mean, do you deal with that a little bit with Dungeons and Dragons too, or is it just
Yeah.
So I mean, so that
Yeah.
what's it like,
So
intellectual property versus your own creation?
I'm in my own creation. I'm just like, there's no guardrails. I'm just flying off the cliff over and over again. And I'm just like, wee. Um, you working on these licenses, so far I've been really fortunate where Firefly and D&D are these sort of classic evergreen properties that uh, you know they're taking in different directions, so there's a lot of freedom to sort of do what I want, fitting in the larger plans for like Wizards of the Coast with the D&D cartoon and that sort of those
Mhm.
characters and their larger plan. I get that guidance. So I write what I think the story needs in a particular script. And then they come back to me with notes and they say, well, we need to swap this monster because sometimes they don't even tell me. They're like, we need to swap this out. And I know that it's because they're going to use it for something else.
Yeah.
Um, for Ghostbusters, it's been fun because they definitely have given guardrails. Um, I've gotten the opportunity to see some of the things that are happening with Ghostbusters going forward and sort of the plans going forward. I got a peek at some of the Frozen Empire before, because so that we can ramp up to that, so I don't touch on some of the
Yeah.
stuff that's going on there. Um, so they have been really good about coming in and saying what is on the table and what's not, and lots on the table. And then they've given me total freedom. So I'm on an 8-lane highway and there are guardrails so I don't go off the cliff, but I'm swerving around as much as I want.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, like I said, it's good to have the guardrails to know. And you'd hate to have like a script written and be like, "Oh, this is gonna be amazing," and then have them come back to you and be like, "Yeah, you can't do any of that." So it is nice to have at least some information
Well,
ahead of time.
sometimes I do it, but and I never write anything where I know for a fact they're going to kick it back. But what I do, if I don't know what their plans are, I'm doing this now with something else. I write what I think is
Yeah.
the best thing,
Mhm.
and I send it to them. And the 99% probability they kick it back and say no, we can't do that. But there's that 1% chance that they come back and they're like, wow, that's actually a great idea. Um, this is my like pie in the sky. They're like, well, you can't do that because we're going to do it.
Yes.
You just give them ideas, but it's their
Yes.
IP, so they can do whatever they
Yes,
want.
exactly. They want
Um,
them with it. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's funny how because I love. I think I heard a podcast with Kevin Smith when he was writing the Howard the Duck. They were going to do a TV show on Hulu, and he was talking about how him and his co-writers and things wanted to write. They're like, oh, we want to use this character, and this character, and he was picking out like obscure behind the
Random.
scenes characters, and they're like, you can't do this one, this one, this one, and then he's like, cool, and he kept on writing, and then he's thinking to himself, well, why can't I? Are they actually going to show up somewhere else in the Marvel universe? Like, what's going on? Why can't I touch these characters? And it got his brain working so hard. He's like, I got to start thinking about that. To this day, none of those characters have showed up anywhere yet. But he's just like, was just amazed that I couldn't use whatever. I forget, it was random characters that didn't make any sense. But he's like, maybe they have a plan for these people in the future, so that your
Well,
brain
and I
might
think
work.
they do, and I
Yeah,
think they do, and it's like you almost not like legacy characters like
yeah,
Luke, and Leia and that sort of thing, but I mean, other characters that show up out there, you almost are better off, trying to use those characters that already exist because
yeah.
they may have lived their life cycle and whatever they're using it for. Yeah, but I mean, I, we just write funny books, man.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just seems so much fun to you've been able to the benefit to you I think is also, and this is also me speaking for you, but is that you've been able to touch things like Canto and Specs and these books that are your own, and Killer Queens, your own creations that are still out there, and like there's more Canto coming, which is amazing, and things coming from over at Dark Horse, and there's a future in the Canto world there, but also to be able to go in there and actually have the ability to touch someone's licensed property and do some fun things that you, like I said, you watched on TV and all this stuff. And people are going into it already with a base knowledge. Like when I go and I picked up Specs for the first time, we had no idea what the heck the world was about, except for your little blurb you put on Previews World that said, so and so, and this is what Specs is about. And until I read the first issue, then I got a grasp of actually what it was about. This is something like I already have the basis of Ghostbusters
Right.
84. I have the basis of Afterlife to really kind of get an idea on it. So people already have that little information to go into the reading this book. It's kind of cool. You get to live both worlds in this. And I think that's a pretty cool thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I call it the shared language. So it's very much I think about that. I was just thinking about this recently when you're looking at sequels.
Mm,
You get such freedom to do different things in sequels because you're not spending time meeting the characters for the first time, establishing the world, that sort of thing. Can you imagine if Avengers was the first Marvel movie to come out and we had to introduce all these different characters? Like it was just it wouldn't be what it is. So when you have this shared language with the audience in a sequel, for example, you can use all of the real estate that you normally would use
mm.
to flesh out that blurb that's in Previews World, and you already know the audience understands these characters, so you can do different things with them now without spending time to introduce them. And I love that so
Yeah.
much.
Well, I literally recorded earlier today an episode that comes out before this one. We reviewed the 1989 Punisher movie with Dolph Lundgren.
Oh, yeah,
And so
familiar.
we were talking about the idea that that was 1989 and they didn't do an origin story for Punisher, which was kind of weird to me. It was like the funniest thing. They just went in there and Punisher was just killing people and enacting his revenge. And we talked about when Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man, trilogy came out, and they decided to just, this is Spider-Man. He got bitten by a radioactive spider. We'll show you a quick snippet here and there and how this happens. So if you don't know, if you're living under a rock, here you go. But they didn't go into another origin story. And I think that was the greatest thing because we all knew we didn't need to.
Well, we've seen it so many. I mean, we've seen that origin story 1 million times. And
I
so,
mean, Afterlife just came out a couple of years ago. So if you want to know more about these characters' backgrounds a little bit in this thing, you could just go watch that movie and then you can just pick up from where they left off. And so you don't have to worry about diving into who's all these characters, what they're about, who these things do. Yeah, I think it can
yeah,
be fun.
and that movie wouldn't exist if it didn't stand on the shoulders of
Yeah.
all the Ghostbusters that came before, because you'd
Hmm.
have to spend all this time meeting this family. Why are they busting ghosts? What's going on at this farm? And how are they connected to things that had happened before? It's a lot of extra setup, and it just would have never sort of taken off the way that it did,
Yeah.
because the audience, you have that connection already.
I think it's so much fun. I think that's cool also nowadays with the idea of connecting movies and comics. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of things nowadays come from movie wise, come from a basis. Like we have a whole speculator market now on first appearances or whatever because the movie's being made or whatever it may be. And it's cool to see the idea of taking Dark Horse comic and be like, no, this is in the exact same universe in the exact same world as the movies. So if you watch the first movie or the first of the new movies, Afterlife, and you can read this comic and you can watch the other movie, you're reading the same storyline. And that's what's cool about
Right.
this stuff too. I love that. Hopefully might get some people that aren't into comics because they just watched Afterlife and they want to read Back in Town.
I mean, man, if you could do a special variant for opening night of Frozen Empire, iced over cover, frozen. It's frozen in a block of ice.
I thought you were saying Frozen too. I'm like different property there. I think you're
No, no,
Frozen.
no.
That's
The
Disney.
comic book is
Okay.
is
Frozen and
uh
Ice.
it's the comic book in
Can,
carbonite.
can
There, I'm doing another
CGC
one.
can you do since CGC make some sort of like refrigerated
Can you
encapsulated
imagine?
thing so you can actually put the ice block in there with a comic on the inside of it? It's on your counter. The power goes out and your comic book melts. That would be horrible.
But it's I'm too far into the collector's market, because if they were frozen,
Yeah.
if they were encased in ice and you pass them out, then they got all water damaged
Yeah.
and warped because they're waterlogged. And then you dried them out and you send them to CGC and you get like a 1.0 or something. But it's like a 1.0 opening night Frozen Empire wet comic, and it becomes like the collectible to have. The worse condition it's in, the,
Yeah.
the more expensive it is.
Someone would have the comic and they'd sell it for more money than you got paid to make the comic.
I know. I'll
That's
get
how
my
the world
comps.
works.
I'll get my comps.
Get your comps. There you go.
My
That's how you,
unfrozen comps.
yeah, frozen comps. Yours will be the ones that are pristine. They're like, yeah, this actually wasn't in the ice. So there you go.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. So those are
see,
super rare because they
super
never
rare.
got
Yeah.
frozen.
But yeah, so you're this back in town. Ghostbusters Back in Town. It comes out March 27th, which is a couple days before WonderCon, which is kind of cool too. But it comes out a week or not a week, but like 5 days or 4 days after the Frozen Empire hits theaters, which is
Right.
kind of cool in my opinion because I was thinking about it and like you could watch Afterlife at home and then go see Frozen Empire and then on the following Wednesday go pick up a copy of this and get into what happens in between. How many issues is this going to be? This Back in Town one, do you know?
It's four. It's
Before
going to
issue
be a 4 issue mini. Yep.
and that comes out monthly, so you'll have March, April, May,
To
June. I'm
June.
guessing. Yeah. Is
Yeah,
it all
which then
written?
yeah, no, it's done. Um, I think the art is finished,
Okay.
I want to say. Um, I honestly can't remember, but
Okay.
yeah, we're definitely in a production timeline where it's finished right ahead of time. Um, but yeah, for me personally, that's March, April, May, June, and then
Yeah.
June the new Canto starts coming out, and that's 6 issues, and that goes to the end of the year. So it's nice to have this pipeline of comics coming out once a month where I can go in and sort of wave them around and hope people buy a copy.
In the idea of having be able to go see the movies, and by the time this series ends, I would guess that Frozen Empire would be on digital, so those
Mm-hmm.
people could watch it again, read the comic. It'd be a whole thing. It's actually a cool thing. And actually, I think I just saw, and this is obviously probably tentative, but Penguin Random House. I was googling it earlier. The trade of this would come out sometime in October, so that would be cool too, because October is towards the
For
end of the year.
Halloween
Yeah, right
and
around Halloween.
Halloween.
I literally think it's the date's October 29th, so it's like 2 days
Yeah,
before Halloween.
it's interesting that the movie was originally slated to come out that weekend of WonderCon, so the last
Yeah.
weekend in March, and they moved it up a week. And that had nothing to do with anything that we're doing on the comic
Mm.
side of things. But I think, I'm thinking about it. I think you're right that having the movie come out the week ahead of time gets people into the shop
Yeah.
the next week to buy a tie-in comic book to sort of continue to live in that world.
And I wish this is going to come out closer to this is going to come out in a couple weeks. So obviously, final order cutoffs and all that stuff actually is happening today. Is that it? Or we're
As we
recording
are
this.
recording this, it is happening
Um,
today. But that's okay. I'm sure if there is a
yeah.
sellout, which, hopefully that happens, um, they will come back with a second print. You can get that. I have a hunch, Dark Horse is always about, first and foremost, it's about readers. So I have a hunch that they are going to print as many as they possibly can print to cover demand. So whether or not we get a second print, hopefully copies will be out there and they won't be ghosts. Everyone listening, this is what you're getting in Ghostbusters Back in Town.
Ghosts and dad jokes and fun stuff like that. No, I mean
Puns and
we've come
dad jokes,
we
man.
come to
Come
expect
on.
that, David, and that's we come to expect from Ghostbusters and from you. But no, it's how
I
it
mean,
is,
that was
right?
ninja level dad joke
Yes, there you go.
territory. So
But I mean, the funny thing is some a number of times that my local comic book shop, I'm not going to name publishers or entities or anything like that, but like that something would come out and they'd go into the store and someone would be like, I want this, I just saw this on TV or a movie. Can you get me this? And they'd go on and the trades are like sold out and out of print and all this other stuff. And I'm always like, that doesn't make any sense to me. You have an opportunity to use marketing, which someone paid a ticket to go see, and then potentially come in and buy more of your stuff. So like the idea that this comes out on a Friday and even if people don't go see it on Friday, even if they wait to go see it, it's in the trailers are going to be out there and people are going to be talking about it. It's going to be on social
right.
media. And then they're going to be like, oh, comic book's coming out. That's badass. And they'll be able to go out and get the comic book on Wednesday and read it and so on. And then, hopefully read the whole series. It's 4 issues, people. It's not that hard. Like, come on.
Well, it was interesting when Canto first came out in 2019. It was, the first issue was really popular and people bought all the copies. And I mean, it's cool, but also you can't get readers on board if there are
Mm,
no copies available on the shelves. So I have over my evolution for the past 5 years has been much more in the camp of if you want to do like limited variants and make those kind of the
mm,
scarcity, then do that. But the main covers, you want people to read the
yeah.
book. We're not we're not in the business of making trading cards. These are
Yes.
comics and they're meant to be read. So I hope that there's tons of copies everywhere and everybody can get a copy. I'll sign as many copies as you put in front of my face because I'm a monster. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's so much fun to see this. I'm like so excited to see. Like I said, I am entrenched in wanting to go see this movie and having more things that go around the movie makes me so happy. And so like when I saw this and I I was wicked early on this. I'm emailing Caitlin over at Dark Horse being like, hey, let's do this. Let's set this up because I want to talk about it. And it's so
Awesome.
much fun. And she sent me the uncorrected proof of it, the yellow cover on it, because she's just like, you need to read this before we talk to him. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, I don't have anything that's like official yet, but here's this. Just don't share it with anybody else. I'm like, don't worry, I'll protect it on my iPad so no one else can see it and get out
Your
there. But
iPad catches on fire.
yeah, yeah, I finished reading. I flipped to the last page and just went. I was like, jeez. But yeah, so at March 27th, the first issue comes out, and then every month after that. So make sure you tell your LCS you want it in your pull box. But you got Canto coming too. I wanted to touch quickly, briefly on Canto. You have like hardcovers coming out or trades or what's the
Just
whole thing
like
going on?
we're flooding the market with Canto. So Dark Horse, we talked about this last time. I think
Yeah.
Dark Horse has picked up the license for us
Mm.
for Canto, and so they're releasing hardcover, newly printed hardcovers for all the volumes. So there's 4 volumes so far, and those start coming out. There's one in June. There's going to be 2 coming out in July and one in August. And those are going to have new back matter in them. So even if you have those IDW softcover versions, you definitely want to pick up these beautiful hardcovers to go on your shelf. And in the midst of all that, we're actually completing what we're calling the Shrouded Men saga. So it's going to be 6 more issues of a mini series called Canto: A Place Like Home, and this is the final confrontation, the wrap up of this. It's going to be a total of 29 issues over 5 volumes, and it's going to wrap up this big saga, this big adventure that Canto has been on. And that comes out monthly starting in June. So I think that would put us in like November, December.
That's awesome. That's so exciting. It must be fun touching Canto again. You
Did you
there?
freeze?
I'm
Oh,
here.
yeah,
It
yeah.
must be fun
You
just being
just
like to promote Canto again and not have it be like, this behind this back burner thing. It must be nice to have like uh
yeah. Well, the last new Canto that came out, I think was I want to say August of 22.
mhm.
So it's really nice, and I can, folks are really excited. I just turned in the script for the 4th issue of this new miniseries that's coming, this final, and we all got super emotional about it because we're not pulling any punches, we're not holding anything back. So everything is fair game as we approach this end game with Canto, and I don't think everybody's gonna make it quite to the end. And we've been dangling it out there about Canto's fate at the end of this, all
Mhm.
of this. So you're just gonna have to wait and see.
And yeah, and that's awesome. I can't wait. It's so much fun. And are there still things working in Hollywood on this thing, and obviously you can't say
Yeah.
much about it, but there's still wheels turning and things moving. That's really cool too. And then you just wrapped up Killer Queens, volume 2, which is awesome. That must be coming out in trade at some point towards the end of the year.
Yeah, and we just got
Um,
nominated for a GLAAD award for the sequel. So
there you
both
go.
Killer Queens and Killer Queens 2 have been nominated for GLAAD awards. Killer Queens 1 was nominated for an Eisner. And so the collection of the second volume is coming out in May, I think.
Yeah, I think it's just May
Uh,
28th on Penguin Random House.
right
Yeah,
at the
May
end,
28th.
right at the end of May, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, if we continue to sell well, we will get this third get a third volume in there. I think a third volume of 4 issues would be cool to sort of wrap up. I have a Max story in mind. If the first volume was about Max and Alex together, the
Mhm.
second volume was definitely about Alex, and so the last volume will be about Max and where he came from and who he is. So hopefully that happens. Yeah, I think that's everything.
That you can say. I mean, let's be honest. I've always said this to creators who are around here. If you have everything you can announce possible, then you need to get something on your schedule because you gotta at some point it's gonna end and you need to have something on that thing. So I'm guessing you're pitching more and doing all that stuff too. And I'll always promote and recommend people get specs that's available in trade as well. So check that
Thank
out
you.
as well. Yeah, it was one of my comics
I
of the
love that
year.
stories.
I love that book. It's so good. And so yeah, and then back in town. I'm so excited. Ghostbusters, man. I can't believe I love it that you're doing Ghostbusters. This is so much fun to do this. So check that out March 27th. Yeah, and then see you at conventions
Thanks.
and stuff. I mean, I'm sure you'll be doing signings like you mentioned the Ghostbuster signing coming up, and then you obviously are going to be at some conventions this year. I'm guessing you'll be at some of the bigger ones. I'm not sure what your schedule looks like in
San Diego,
2024.
New York, LA, WonderCon, just like the
Nice.
highlights. The
Uh,
highlights.
uh, Question: Are you getting invited to the premiere in New York City for Frozen Empire?
Not that I'm aware of yet. I kind of wanted to, if it was in LA, I'm sure that would happen. But New York's kind of a bigger lift.
Yeah.
So I may be enjoying it from afar. but I'll be cheering on the whole film team because they're all just amazing people, and they've been so supportive. Working with Jason and Gil in
Yeah.
particular has been, I mean, they send back ideas for dialogue, and it's so nobody loves getting notes except when they come from Jason Reitman, and you're laughing your face off because they're so funny. So
Yes.
funny.
There is a
So
certain number of people like, okay, you're allowed to give me notes on that. I can take notes from you. It's fine.
yeah, because I'll
You
write
just,
dialogue, and then Jason will send in. He's like, "What about this dialogue?" I'm like, "Well, that's way better, way funnier than anything I just did. So let's use yours."
I'm going to change this one word so it looks like it's mine because I have a revision on it, but still.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I gotta be useful somehow.
But if you don't go to the premiere, you're probably obviously going to be there opening night to see this movie, to see what this thing is, what this awesome Frozen Empire looks like from Ghostbusters. But yeah, back in town,
It's
available
gonna
from
be
Dark Horse,
amazing.
March 27th. Tell your local comic book shop that you want a copy because obviously this will come out past FOC, but just tell them and they'll put one in your put one off to the side for you. So you make sure you grab a copy on opening day. We're gonna call it opening day
Opening
for
day.
comics.
Let's
Opening
go.
day for
Let's
comics
go.
because whatever. But I appreciate it again, David, for coming on and chatting Ghostbusters and comics and everything in between. Enjoy your life in general until we talk again. I'm sure you'll be on at some point in the future. We always love having you on, so I hope you come back.
Thanks, Justin. It's always fun to chat with you, and hopefully the next thing is like blow the doors off, right?
Exactly. Thanks, David.